find it ironic that I have to interrupt partnership occurring to talk about partnership building, right? Thank you, everyone. So before moving kind of into kind of one of the next phases, I want to do a pretty simple demonstration of the importance of the preschool year and the kindergarten year. So I'm going to need 3 volunteers. And you just kind of stand and move. Pretty easy. Wait, come on up. Come on up. Thank you. Come on up. Thank you. One more. Thank you. Okay, so if you don't mind, kind of lining up here this way, facing that way. Excellent. Yep. You're perfect. Facing this way. And so we have Jamika. Thank you for coming. Jamika was in a quality preschool program. She was enrolled and she went nearly every day. So on her path to reading and school success, she gets to take 3 steps forward. Okay. Nikia was also enrolled in a preschool program. It wasn't quite the same quality, and she didn't quite attend as much as she should, so she only gets to take 1 step forward. Lisa, aka Andrea. Not only did her family just didn't have access to quality pre-K, right? It wasn't in her community, they weren't aware. So she's got to actually take 2 steps back. There wasn't the routines and the culture in that household. So our promising kindergarten student attended throughout the year, good attendance, good teacher, and she had 3 more steps of growth. Having already had spotty attendance, coming in a little bit behind, the growth wasn't the same. So she missed more days, she was less likely to attend, and she didn't quite pick up as much. So you, again, 2 steps. We're going to be 2 steps. Never having the chance to kind of be in an environment, started off a little bit behind, but also continued to kind of have those jitters and those attendance issues. So 2 steps forward. And if we're to continue to do this, this is the every year type of encounter where those kids that tended to come in with the most and had the best routines and patterns continue to take the most steps forward, while those in the middle took some strides but not as great, and those that were the furthest behind continued to get further and further behind. This quick illustration is really the steps on how we get to the achievement and the reading gap that we have when we get to 3rd grade. And just those early years, you can see how it's already begun to pace themselves out, and that path kind of continues. So thank you for kind of demonstrating that for us. Thank you. One of the things that was asked is, where do we start, right? And we gave some data from some local and national stuff, or local to me, and these are things that we started to look at. And part of the issue is knowing where our challenges might be, where our biggest gains might be made. And so I put these up, and we'll really address these more when we get to the action piece. But what we found is knowing at least this information helped us to gauge where we put our time, energy, and resources into. So the enrollment numbers, were they to the early 20s of June? How many were there on the first day? How many were coming after the first day? And what % of the kids were in preschool for the target families that weren't in preschool? When we looked at transition, this was probably the hardest one for us to get a gauge on number, because there was no proper system when we started that really kind of looked at these things. So who and which kids were involved with transition practices? Part of this we wanted to know for research, right? So that we knew children in preschool or out of preschool, if they were part of transition events, did they do better, worse, or differently, right? So that's one of the things that we wanted to look at cover. And then attendance. Did they keep coming, and what were their chronic absence numbers? I put the DATT or the DAT up there. The DATT is the system that's been created nationally for tracking chronic absence by child, by school, by class, by income, by race, by all those elements, right? It's an Excel form that our schools have used to then convert their attendance data into this. And it's available, and your school, your district, or your community partner can go to attendanceworks.org, and sign up for this, and you get this for free. We've been partners with Hetty Chang out of Attendance Works for a number of years. She is the leading absenteeism person for the early years in the country. And she's a wonderful and great partner. We've had her out to Pittsburgh a couple times now. And those things help us to get engaged. So those are some markers. But let's move forward. So we are going to look at kind of what's all of our role. What's each one of our role in kind of tackling these major issues that we have. So we talked about the challenge, right? So we talked about what's kind of getting in the way. We're going to kind of talk about perhaps some possible solutions. And then lastly, we're going to end today with what will each of us do, right? This was one of the promises that we had as a conference planning group, is how often have you gone to something and be like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. Ooh, we should do that. You go home, you sleep, and you're like, oh, that was kind of a decent day. The next morning you get up, you get your cup of coffee, and you go and do about what you've always done, right? So one of our true goals in this today and what we do moving forward is to think about some next steps that we can take and where we have an active place to make a difference. So that's one of the goals. So why a frog? Why a bull? When we were looking at all the challenges that we had, it's just kindergarten. The policies that were in place that kind of promoted that it doesn't matter as much as it should, right? When we talked with families about their bad experiences, we learned that it can't be that we simply go out and tell people. Because part of my first thought is, when we go door to door, if we just have a conversation about how important kindergarten is, it'll change everything, right? So we went door to door and knocked on doors. It must not count. Is that a Jehovah's Witness? We had despite us thinking we were going to be carriers of all this great information, we had difficulty connecting with families. We did. So I happened to be reading, because I'm one of those nerds that reads like social psychology books for my spare time. Yeah. So we talked about Gladwell's book, The Outliers, which kind of spawned this red shirting, and I'm like, Malcolm Gladwell, you silly guy. But I happened to be reading a different book by him called The Tipping Point. Anyone's read that, right? The Tipping Point. And there's a chapter in it where he talks about the emergence of educational television. And one of the examples that he gives is the emergence of Sesame Street as probably the first education through television forums. Do folks know why Sesame Street was created? Very similar to what we're talking about today. If we can't get every child to come to preschool, let's take preschool to the home. So that was the intent. And especially specifically targeting, can we bring preschool into the home, into low-income households, right? And so the education folks said, you can't learn through that. It has to be one-on-one interactions and these other elements. And so Sesame Street as a pilot was put through a lot of rigor that other programs might not have been put through. And so they tested kids after they were viewing the pilots of Sesame Street, and they do all these funky things, right? Like how long their eyes stayed traced on the television to see if they were engaged, and then some retention type testing with these kids. And the first pilots of Sesame Street, yay or nay? Nay. They weren't retaining, they weren't staying engaged. And that was a problem, right? And so they did one subtle nuance, and retested and had much greater gains. When they partnered with Jim Henson and the Muppets, kids enjoyed and were engaged with the characters long enough to stay engaged with the message. The characters were purposely different character traits that kids could identify with the different characters based on their own traits. And through that kind of pairing, learning was occurring, right? And so I'm sitting, I remember this to this day, it was a Sunday night when I was reading that chapter, and I said, we need a mascot for kindergarten. And I was so excited. So I was going through who was going to be, what it was going to be, and my grant was a school readiness grant, so I'm like, it's ready, Freddie. My mom used to say, are you ready, Freddie, when we're getting ready to go someplace? Ready, Freddie would be a frog. Okay? Maybe I was just reading about Sesame Street, so maybe subliminally Kermit was still in there. I don't know. I'm not going to say that. And so I go into my supervisor at that time's office in the morning, because we had been struggling. We've been struggling with how do we connect with families to get the message to them, right? And I said, we need I told her about the chapter that I was reading. We need a mascot. It's going to be a frog, and that's what we're going to do. And she said, okay, kind of in that same tone. And the next time that we went out and did our community outreach, we went out with these shirts on, right? So we went out with these shirts on, and we knocked on doors, and they opened. They opened. It was kind of unbelievable at how they opened. And the biggest reason why families kind of opened the door is they thought we were at summer camp. That shirt kind of screams summer camp, doesn't it? And I say this, so as a parent, and to the parents that are out there, and to the parents that we visited, I am a believer, and sometimes people don't always think this, but I'm a believer that every parent loves their child. It sounds simple, but there's people that don't honestly believe that someone who does this would love their child. And there's reasons behind all these things, but I believe every parent loves their child. And I kind of, as a parent, also believe that every parent loves to get rid of their child. For moments of things that are going to be positive and are going to do some good. So when they saw something that looked like summer camp, they said, oh, it's for my child. Oh, it's something that's probably good. And, when we said, we're not exactly a summer program, but we kind of have this thing for 180 days a year that your child could be involved in. And it's free. And so we were able to have something that got that kind of that icebreaker, if you will. And it was quite astonishing, the conversations we had. So the branding element of kindergarten allowed a couple things. First of all, the kids had something that they could be kind of gravitate towards and get connected with. I know, a big giant frog, right? A big giant frog. But it was amazing, the events and activities that we'd go to with the frog. Kids would gravitate towards it. While the kids would want their picture with it or whatever, we'd have a conversation with the parent. And it was this grassroots, this from the ground getting there that it seemed to really have a pathway. We took, and actually I wrote a children's book that took the elements of getting ready for school and wrote it into a children's book. There's a lot of great books about the first day of school getting ready for kindergarten, so I don't want to say that this is that much better by any means. This also then is an online book that kids can do activities with, so that's one of the elements that we created. I also forgot to say this at the beginning. This is just an aside. This presentation, I know that I see people taking notes and stuff. We do put this presentation up on our website at the end, and we can somehow link to. So if there's any need or access to this, there will be this afterwards. We heard from a lot of families, they didn't know when to register for school. We sat in the initial pilot, and we had someone from the district, we had the principal of the particular school, and we had a kindergarten teacher, and I said to them, don't say it out loud, write it on a piece of paper. When should families enroll in school? 3 different answers, right? So what the truth was is that families could enroll at any time. There's no targeted time to enroll. Parents said, we want concrete. We want to know this week. Could they enroll at any time? Absolutely. But we targeted a week in time to kind of raise awareness around it. And so one of the things is we put big banners up about when this would be. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we wanted to find kids that were perhaps the furthest behind, and we created a 6-session parent-child club that occurs during the summer that kind of caught families up that were maybe a little bit behind. And then lastly, it's also who we roll with, right? Some street cred. No. Honestly, what this represents is that we always, it's amazing, we expect families to come to our stuff. We're going to have this thing, and we expect the families to come to that, right? No single person would go to all of these things or any of these things collectively, right? Because how many of you go to your children's everything? You try, right? You try, but sometimes it's hard, it's very difficult. So again, learning from maybe instead of us expecting them to come to us, let's go to them. This is an example. We got from our city parks a listing of where community events and activities were going on, and we went to them. And we'd have the frog and get your photo with Freddie types of things. So you guys have your picture taken in the bowl type of activities, and that was a great way to kind of connect with families. I'll say this about branding, because before we go through the process, because I remember a frog equals kindergarten was a tough sell. Frog equals kindergarten, tough sell. And so the example that I give, though, is branding occurs every single day. And I remember driving, and I was going from this event to this event with my two kids, and like we talked about the rules about TV, there's kind of the rules about fast food. I said a curse word, right? And I'm driving, I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to get food, and we have to go from this to this. And so I'm driving by this place, right? And my son was about a year and a half, and my daughter was like 3.5. And I went through the drive-through, and I handed stuff back. And the next time we went by this place, my 3.5-year-old goes, French fries. One parent. Branding occurs all the time. And it was 2 years into this community approach in one community, not the entireness of Pittsburgh, that we'd have an event. And at those events, there was other characters, because we'd have we have the Steeler person who everyone knew, but then there's the local amusement park that had Kennywood Kangaroo, the Kennywood Kangaroo. Within 2 years, more people knew Ready Freddy as the frog, the kindergarten frog, than knew the mascot for the local amusement park. Branding occurs very organically if intentional about it. The other thing that we learned from is parent voice. So that second time that we went and did door-to-door outreach, we partnered one of our staff with a parent that we hired from the community. A familiar face when we knocked on that door, right, was something that was very important. We also learned, if you look at that right there, does that look like the frog that I showed you earlier? We learned about copyright infringement. We learned that a clip art cannot be used for marketing, even if it's marketing for school. So we had, after we said sorry to Bill Gates and Microsoft, we had our own frog created for that regard. But parent voice was one of the key elements that we learned. We also, and you don't necessarily get this from this, but we also learned the beauty that branding kind of supersedes language. That for and we don't have the diversity that you guys have here in Durham. I guess we're not that fortunate. We have a very small pocket of Somali refugee population in a particular school, and we have a small pocket of Latino Hispanic in one particular area too. But what we've learned is that at least the brand itself, across language, stood for kindergarten. We then had to go, and we were having a conversation at the break, that there's still elements that we have to look at with language in which things are at. We have both Ready Freddy and Listo Freddy, which is Ready Freddy in Spanish. And so we've, specifically our parent materials, we've been sure to translate those into Spanish. Just showing up as a frog at things is fun. But this is, when we've been at other community events and activities, this is a grandparent, right? And we saw a large number of grandparents that were signing up and enrolling their children, that we had this kindergarten club, or that club that I was talking about preparation. We had a club specifically for grandparents in a particular neighborhood where there's a large number of grandparents registering kids. And what's interesting is the conversation then is if we think school was different a generation ago, or kindergarten was different a generation ago, 2 generations ago was extremely different in their perceptions about what kindergarten was. But it's amazing the number of times that we've done this, and at the close of it, when the grandparents often said, do you know, if I maybe would have done this differently the first time, I maybe wouldn't be raising my grandchildren. Their willingness to now accept education differently was very much there. And so that was a great conversation. Spreading the word through different modes and means. So often we think of, well, if we just send out a flyer in a book bag, that those flyers will result in getting into the right hands, and parents will then do what's requested, right? Well, not everything's right. So the rule of 7, who's my marketing? I have some marketing communications people, right? The rules of 7, that you can see things across different platforms and different modes and mediums, it really was very much the case. So looking to think of where families were in some capacity between 4 and 5. Health clinics, grocery stores, dollar stores, those places were critical in getting the message out. So having a unified message and then spreading the word in a vast amount of ways. And our first community, where we truly had the year prior, 25% of the kids were there the first day, we used this approach. And it was a planning meeting that had representation from the community, so our family support centers, our community-based early childhood centers, our YMCA, and a couple other folks. Then our school personnel were all sitting at a table with parents. And we were talking about the barriers to these things. And it was one parent that said, I don't know if you know this, but in this community, in this particular school, it was a large public housing community that fed into a school. Most of the school's population were from a public housing community. And the parent from that public housing community said, I don't know if you know it, but there's only one food place that delivers to this neighborhood. Right? There's only one food place. And it happened to be a little pizza shop. And we said, well, I wonder if that pizza shop would put our flyer on their pizza boxes for the week leading up to this piloting of a transition week, of an enrollment week. And lo and behold, they said, sure, if you come in and tape them to the boxes, we'll deliver them. Being that this project was kind of university-based, when families came to enroll the next week, we asked them how they heard about it. The most common response was through or because of the pizza boxes. Someone saw it and handed it to someone else, right? So, interesting, right? So, you're going to see that we had successful numbers at this first pilot school. So then we're going to replicate at another school, and I walk into the first planning meeting, pizza boxes, I got it, right? It's the magic bullet. You get a pizza box, you get a pizza box, right? And they said, well, which one? There was like 17 pizza companies that delivered in that particular neighborhood. So that particular place didn't work. So we had the conversation, what is unique to this community? Where do families go that might be our little niche? And they said, there's 2 nail salons. There's 2 nail salons that many of the mothers, regardless of income, tend to go to. Nail salons for that community. So it's really what I want to stress, and it's why the community is here. Is it almost, there's a piece and an element that we can talk about that's global, and then there's community-based strategies that have to be discovered by community planning teams. And that's why you're divided into these groups, to begin maybe that process, but then to move forward with it. But knowing your communities, no one knows them better than you, and specifically no one knows them better than the families that are living in those communities. So them having a place and an active voice is crucial to understanding. One of the things that we did when we were planning our first transition events, I took the list out of, it actually came out of North Carolina, the CERD, right? The terrific transitions, and there's a list of like 150 different transition events. We went through that list with our 2 parents. Our 2 parents became our kind of our barometer. Oh, good idea, good idea. Parents, would you guys do that? What about, so we went through the list of 150, right? And I said, okay, what's important to you? What's important to you the week before school begins, right? And they said, haircuts and hair braiding. Interesting, okay. So we had local beauticians, barbers, and moms come into the school and cut and braid hair for free while teachers got to know the kids and the parents during that moment. It's listening to what the needs are and meeting it, right? A lot more people are willing to go to something that they want to go to than something they feel just simply forced to go to. We learned a lot about what, remember we said bad last experience with school? When I first got this grant, and to those that give funding sometimes, you're going to appreciate this. A grant is gotten without the school buy-in. The districts had signed off on it, but the particular school we're going to pilot on didn't necessarily have their signature on it. So in this particular case, I'm excited we got the grant. I'm calling and emailing the principal, and I'm getting no response. And I'm like, okay, well, okay. So I do a little thing called just show up. Anyone ever do the just show up approach? Just show up. And I've learned, and I've worked in schools in Alabama for a number of years. I've worked with programs in Wisconsin. So I'm someone who's kind of comfortable and familiar with going to school, and I was comfortable with waiting as long as it took. So let's walk through the pathway. Like, let's walk through a typical path of getting to a school. And when one arrives at the building, it's easy and clear to go to find the parent/visitor parking spots, right? So I drove past none of those because they didn't exist. And I've learned that there is a parking spot for me at most places, because it's marked with, your vehicle will be towed. Right? If not a district or board employee or something like that. That's typically what the only signage that I see. There's a principal, vice principal, custodian, you will be towed. That tends to be those marks. Then I've learned once I get to a building, right? Once I get to a building, there's multiple doors to go in. I've learned over time to look for the one with the big glass eye bubble. You guys know what I'm talking about? The one with a camera in it? Right? And you go to that door. I know someone who's familiar with schools, right? You go to that door and you press the little buzzer thing, because we want to keep our kids safe. That's a good thing that the facility is locked, right? You press the little button, there's the little camera there, and then that's the moment when I'm like not sure what face to make. And I'm kind of like, you're trying to be smiley but not too smiley because you don't want to look weird, right? And you end up looking weird. So you press the button, and I've done over 1,000 school visits. I've done easily over 1,000 school visits. And the beauty of it is when you press that button, you get someone that always says, welcome to such and such elementary, how can I help you? 3 out of 1,000 visits has someone ever said welcome through that buzzer. Isn't that astonishing? All that typically you get is a which is the electricity going to the door that's going to open, right? So I know this is the process, so I press the button. And I'll preface this with, there's the glass eye bubble, the button, and then 4 steel doors. Okay, 4 steel doors. So I press the button, give the awkward look, hear that and I go to, oh, have you ever had that happen when you jiggle the door and it didn't open? So you do the embarrassing thing, and this is truly a true story, okay? So you do this thing where you kind of like sheepishly go back and you press it again, and you have your hand on the door this time because you don't want to miss it. It's not that door. 3rd time, press the button, go to steel door number 2. It's not that one. So now I'm kind of like, so I'm like using my foot to get the button, and lo and behold, it's door number 3. It's door number 3 of 3 steel doors that opens, right? If I had been someone who doesn't get paid to go to work at schools, who had a bad last experience with school, would I have done that 4 times? No. So is it that surprising that families wait until there's an enrollment something or to kind of go and do this process? So I then go down to the office, which, if anyone's, the point to this piece is that walking through a school as if it were the first time. And sometimes we forget what that's like if we've been in a building for a long period of time. But a lot of our buildings too, when you walk in, there's not clear signage. Maybe the office was reconstructed and moved to some other place. But the signage to the office is one of the elements I've looked at. But I go to the office, and again, I've just shown up. I don't have an appointment. So I said, I'll wait as long as it takes, And so I sat for 45 minutes, and during that 45 minutes, I watched how the front office staff interacted with parents that were coming in. Appalling. Rude. Disrespectful. Anyone seen or heard this? What it can be like sometimes? And it was that moment, and I wish I could say that it was this particular school, this particular person, but honestly, it's not saying that that office person isn't great in a large number of schools, because they are wonderful, the warmest and most welcoming person in the world. Because if we want to think about it, a lot of parents' first experience with a school is with that person, right? But it was in that moment when I knew what we were going to be trying with this school that I said, that person has to be on my transition team. Because I want her to be a part of all the conversation we have about first experiences, first encounters, and how important the first year is. And she changed. She changed. She had a new regard for the role that parents play, and the welcome became much greater down the road. But one of the other pieces that we did is we tried to make this process more exciting. And so we put, and these are hard to see what the size are, but they're about 4 foot by 4 foot frog footprints that we had from the front door to the office, then down to the kindergarten pod. And it was so cute. Like, you know, the kids would, when they came in for the events, they were like hopping from one to the next, right? And it was just, you know, it was again, small pieces of a good experience in the first encounter. What was unintended, which was not planned for, is that the other kids in the building, right, saw these frog footprints down from the front office to their rooms, and they're like to the teachers, "What are these frog footprints about?" And the teacher said, "Well, we're trying to get kids registered and come to kindergarten." All of a sudden, we had 400 kids that